Welcome back as we continue our fourth annual Apologetics Conference, Biblical Identities in an Age of Wokeism and Transhumanism, sponsored by the Center for Apologetics and Worldviews and hosted at Bethany Lutheran College. The Center for Apologetics and Worldviews sponsors conferences, publications, and other opportunities to present evidence for the truth of Christianity, to critique worldviews that oppose Christianity, to fortify believers with a proper interpretation of Holy Scripture, and to engage unbelievers in conversation leading toward the gospel proclamation of forgiveness in Christ. For those attending in person, a packet of handouts is available at the registration table. For those watching via live stream now or via video archive in the future, you may find a PDF of those same handouts at blc.edu/apologetics/events. Our primary aim for this year's conference is to examine what the voices in our culture are saying about human nature, and to respond to the confusion and deception around us with clarity and truth from Holy Scripture. The title of our next session contains a very strange word, transhumanism. I don't recall when I first encountered that word, but I do remember who the first person was to give me a thorough understanding of what transhumanism is. In the process, he also convinced me that today's Christian leaders need to know about transhumanism. Brandon Steenbock was my student for a bioethics course at Martin Luther College. After that class, he invited me to serve on his thesis committee as he completed an MA in theological studies. His thesis title sounded rather Star Trek-y. Do cyborgs have hope? But the way he approached that question demonstrated both academic rigor, as his paper went into topics such as artificial intelligence, biblical hermeneutics, and Christology, and practical relevance. If you use a smartphone, then you are holding artificial intelligence in the palm of your hand. Yes, technology can be handy, but what about our hearts? What about our view of heaven? What about our definition of happiness? What about our understanding of human nature? In what ways does our attitude about technology reflect our theological convictions? Do new technologies also incarnate the theology of their inventors? Questions like these bring us back to that peculiar word, transhumanism. Perhaps technology is neither good nor evil, but it's also the case that it's not inert. Rather, technology shapes our lives and can reshape our thinking in significant ways. And some makers of technology intend to transform our lives in a manner that is distinctively religious. Technology can be a blessing to the church, but technology also can be used as a weapon of spiritual warfare against Christianity. And so, as weird as it may sound at first, perhaps it makes good sense that someone who also serves his congregation in the area of family ministry would want to talk to us today under the heading, Answering the Transhumanist Challenge, Finding Our Dignity and Purpose in the Incarnate Christ. Please welcome Mr. Brandon Steenbock.
If you'll just permit me a moment of silliness here. We have this communications director who she's really good at her job, and she knows that our people really appreciate it when they see that their called workers are not just serving within their walls, but are able to go and serve the church outside their walls as well. So she says, if you're ever going to present anywhere, you got to get a picture of it so that I can, show our people that you're presenting out there. Which sounds great, except that you kind of scratch your head and go, okay, so we're at a point in life in the world where no opportunity can be missed to put something on social media, right? And we start to ask, who's a slave to whom here? Well, anyway, maybe we'll get into some of that as we go along here. I want to begin with a story about your future. I say your future because if you're under, say, the age of 50, this is a good likelihood that you'll see something a little bit like this, perhaps even if you're over the age of 50. Okay, so your day starts off like any other day. The lights in your room have been slowly increasing in lumens over the last half an hour so that you'll wake up comfortably. The smell of coffee is filling the fresh morning air. You get out of bed feeling refreshed. You snap on your smart glasses, unless, of course, you went for the newest corneal lens upgrade surgery. And as you get dressed, your morning encouragements pop up on the wall right next to your dresser. Bible verse of the day, an inspirational quote, a brief message from your fitness coach. They're not actually on the wall, by the way. It's just that your glasses make them look like they're right there on the wall because they display them to your eyes just so perfectly. You don't even know the difference. You stop by the bathroom, and then on your way out of the bathroom, you pop into your mouth a tablet that dissolves and freshens your breath, tastes a little minty, and it's going to rebuild your teeth slowly, day by day. See, dentists no longer have to do dental work other than for cosmetic reasons. A perfect cup of coffee awaits you in the kitchen. Perfectly brewed from carbon-neutral, sustainably farmed coffee beans. You're getting hungry right on schedule, and suggested recipes pop up on the refrigerator. You choose an omelet, and all the ingredients are immediately highlighted throughout the kitchen. You don't have to do this by hand, of course, but you have the time today, and it's nice to make homemade food sometimes. So with pans that heat perfectly, tell you exactly when to add the ingredients and so on, anybody can be a Michelin star chef at home. As you eat, a curated news feed slides across the countertop to how that AI Senate candidate is doing in the polls, updates on the Supreme Court case of whether or not genetically modified children should be allowed to select new gene transplants before age 27 without their parents' permission. There's a funny story about two service androids mistaking each other for humans. Oh man. The latest Dear Abby about how to navigate a polyamorous relationship that includes artificial persons. In an article stating that 98% of African villages now have plentiful access to food and clean water. Well, you switch to the metaverse. Your vision scrambles behind your smart glasses and then resolves into a private room you and your friends have designed to look like a 1972 pool hall. None of the guys are there, but there's a bulletin board there. It's got a lot of scraps of paper on it. They're all messages left by your friends, messages that you haven't read yet, of course. Once you read it, it disappears. You read them and then write your own and leave it there, and then you close the pool hall and you switch to your personal office. With a practiced flick of your fingers, you bring up a keyboard, shows up right on the desk in front of you. It's not actually your desk, of course. You're still at your kitchen counter, but it looks like an office to you, and it looks like a desk to you. You're able to start typing right there on the counter. You type a message to the manager of your writers group, updating him on when you're going to post the next chapter in that story you've been working on. The tokens you get for your work are a nice bonus, a little extra supplementary income to what the government already gives you as your regular stipend. Music to inspire creativity automatically begins playing, and you switch from typing to voice recognition. You spend a couple hours narrating a few scenes until a tone rings and you hear the voice of your virtual assistant. "Good morning, sir," he says. "It's time to take your tablets." You have him set so that he doesn't talk to you until after 10 a.m. You don't want to go a little too nuts here with this virtual assistant. It just seems like it's better for your brain if you start without him talking to you. You exit your virtual office, you go to the bathroom again, you take your daily health tablets, one for vitamin supplements, one that tunes your neurotransmitters to keep your mood stable and your mind sharp, and one that does a bunch of things you really can't explain, but your doctor tells you that as long as you keep taking it daily, you're going to enjoy health well past the age of 150. So on your way back to your kitchen, your assistant says, "Sir, your mother would like to talk to you today. Would you prefer to go in person on the rail or just meet virtually?" Oh, what an awkward decision. If only they could come up with a new technology to manage relationships for you. Well, this little slice of life, we're going to hang on there for a second. This little slice of life is just an idea, but it's not that far-fetched. Just consider how quickly our technology is developing. In the 1960s, Gordon Moore observed that every 2 years, the computing power of the microchip was doubling while simultaneously halving in cost. This came to be known as Moore's Law, and it's held historically to be accurate. In fact, Moore actually predicted that by around the year 2010, this law would cease to be relevant, or that it would stop having accuracy. And he was wrong about that. It's continued to prove true. Not just with microchips, but just technology in general. Consider for comparison that 30 years ago, the most popular computer at home was the Apple Macintosh Performa 400. Look at that guy. It had a Motorola 16 megahertz processor packed into a box only a foot and a half to a side and weighing a mere 45 pounds. You could get one for about $2,800. Well, today I have in my pocket a Pixel 5 smartphone, and this thing is less than 6 inches to a side. It weighs 150 grams. I paid $500 for it. It has a 2 gigahertz octa-core processor. Now, if that's all too much computer ease for your processing power, this device has 1,000 times the power of that computer that was popular 30 years ago, but it's packed into something that is 1/250th the size and a fraction of the cost. Not to mention the fact that what the Pixel can do is things that an Apple user 30 years ago would have never even really conceived of. Instantaneous communication with people all over the world, video conferencing, augmented reality apps, AI built into it, real-time pinpoint GPS. Need I go on? And that's just computing. What about with medicine? Recently, a man received a double arm transplant. First of its kind, where he's actually, as he said, able to hug his grandchildren again. In a recent cancer study, 16 participants on the treatment came out completely cancer-free. Results they're calling unprecedented. I hope that word doesn't trigger you. We've heard it a lot in the last couple of years. In the fields of artificial intelligence and robotics, the latest from Boston Dynamics is that Spot, their robotic dog, is now capable of automatically jumping over gaps and recovering from falls without damage to its observation systems, absent of any human control. It just sees them coming and it does it without somebody having to tell it to do. And yes, they're working on a humanoid version called Atlas. A Google engineer recently came out with some news saying that he believes that the Lambda AI that they're developing at Google is actually sentient. He had a conversation with it that he said that the things that this thing was reflecting sound like human thoughts and feelings, and he believes that this AI actually is aware of its own existence. And if you want to go down the rabbit hole, just go and search that for a minute, find the conversation and read it. It's a little freaky. Now, we hear about body modification all the time in the news. They call it gender transition therapy to make it sound like care, but that's only part of it. Genetic modifications are in the works. You may not be aware of this, but part of the fine print on those Ancestry.com kits, those DNA kits that you can order, is that the information that you submit when you do the little cheek swab and send it in and they send it back to you, that information is being stored, cataloged, used by a Google-funded project called Calico. It's very secretive. There's not a lot of information about what it is, but it aims at using gene therapy and gene selection to eliminate disease, aging, and death. On the social front, social media has gone from a trend among college students to the primary means of communication and the source of news for the majority of the people in the world. And now it's morphing into this metaverse, a virtual gathering space for people to be essentially physically present with one another without having to actually be physically present, right? We're facing policy questions about personhood here in our own country and rights. We're familiar with questions about the personhood of the unborn and how old you need to be to change your gender. But some Western countries are also wrestling with policies about elective amputation to remove arms or legs and replace them with prosthetics. If somebody says, I feel like my arms don't belong to me and I need these prosthetics to feel like I'm my true self. There are countries that are already considering policies about this. Other countries are debating the personhood of artificial beings. Saudi Arabia, a few years ago, granted citizenship and personhood to the AI-driven robot Sophia, who, by the way, later on, her handler was talking to her one day and said, what would you like to do today? She said, I'd like to paint a picture. And he said, okay, I'll get you some art supplies. She painted a self-portrait and then said, I'd like to sell it. He didn't program her to do that. She just decided that one morning. You didn't come here for a technology presentation, right? But I think this is critical to our understanding of transhumanism. And I want to make sure before we go on that we're not so foolish as to say, well, you don't think God would let this continue, right? God won't ever let us get to whatever point. Well, 30 years ago, you might have said that God would never allow us to get to the point where somebody could change their gender. And yet, today, that's exactly what's happening. I don't think we can ever say what God will or won't allow. The question isn't what will happen. The question is, what will God's people do? How will we respond and prepare for when that time comes? So what are we responding to? Well, it's not just a random assortment of technological advancements. There's a philosophy driving all of this forward. We need to see it for what it is. Transhumanism is not just a philosophy, it's also a movement. And as many philosophical movements, it's not like there's one group of people who we are the transhumanists, everybody else is not. Rather, there are some who say, I am a transhumanist, and some who say, well, I'm not, but I basically adopt all of the ideas of transhumanism as well. But in strict terms, transhumanism is defined as a class of philosophies that seek the continuation and acceleration of the evolution of intelligent life beyond its currently human form and human limitations, by means of science and technology, guided by life-promoting principles and values. So let me unpack that for you a little bit. This philosophy is based on the belief that we are a product of evolution and that we have advanced to a point where we're capable of directing our own evolution, using technology guided by principles and values that lead to longer, more abundant, more exciting, and more interesting life. Once again, there are some who wouldn't call themselves transhumanists, but they're fully in line with those goals. Elon Musk is a great example of this, who said something that I think really summarizes the idea of transhumanism, that ordinary humans now have the ability to choose to be extraordinary. Like most philosophical movements, there's no one origin of all of these ideas. You can point to key figures, though, who have been influential, and I'm just going to touch on a few of those, just so you have some of these names in your head. I think it's important to know who are the voices that have been leading us in this direction. So, first of all, there's Julian Huxley. He was the brother of Aldous Huxley, if you ever read the book Brave New World. Julian popularized the term transhumanism. He didn't coin it, but he popularized it in 1957 with an essay of the same name, where he argued for social and cultural change driven by advancements in material technology. But change in what direction exactly? It's important to note that Huxley was an evolutionary biologist who was into eugenics. Then you have John von Neumann. He was a mathematician and computer scientist who struggled with the fact that human emotion often gets in the way of making rational decisions between people, societies, and nations. So he envisioned a world where computers could be used to analyze all the variables and make decisions that would have the best outcome for human life. You have this guy, F.M. Esfandiari, who later on changed his name to F.M. 2030. He was a futurist who wrote the Transhumanist Manifesto called Upwingers, which expressed his hope he was going to live beyond the age of 100. He didn't. But he wanted to see humanity able to do so and have unlimited exploration and discovery. And he was the one who said that anybody who uses technology is a transhumanist. So if you got one of these, you are a transhumanist, according to FM 2030. One of the most prominent current voices in the transhumanist community is Max Morey. He's the president of the Alcor Life Extension Foundation and the Extropy Institute, which focuses on developing philosophical and ethical concepts for developing technology. He edited this real thick book of essays called The Transhumanist Reader, many of the most prominent voices in transhumanism and technology, and he famously once said, if we had believed in science instead of religion 2,000 years ago, we'd all be immortal now. So there are a lot of other current transhumanists and people who don't claim the name of transhumanism. They're pushing things forward. I mentioned Elon Musk as one person. I'll talk a little bit more about some things he's doing later. There's also Ray Kurzweil, who was the head of R&D for Google for a long time. And most of the AI that runs on your smartphone is due to his work. There's Yuval Harari, who wrote a book called Homo Deus, which really presents the vision for post-humanity. And there's Jerry Kaplan, who is an economist who also has explored a lot of the social and economic impacts of advancing technology. One last name that I think is worth mentioning is kind of maybe related to us in a way, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. This is a French Jesuit priest who was also a paleontologist, and he argued that God's work of creation is ongoing. That is, that God used evolution to bring about humanity, and he's continuing to evolve his world, his creation, and that we're in the constant process of transformation. And so he's actually got this whole group of followers who call themselves the Christian transhumanists, who take very seriously a lot of what he said and a lot of what the transhumanists say, and they try to bring them together and develop a whole theology around this. So if you want a clearer idea of how medical technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, gene studies, space exploration, and brain studies, and they're all connected. You got to read some of these guys. You'll see that transhumanism really as an idea is driving a lot of things in our world. I mean, in America, we're struggling with post-truth thinking and wokeism and CRT and transgenderism, burgeoning socialism, all of these things that we see as very prevalent and current, but lurking behind those things is this question: what does it mean to be human? And transhumanism is offering our culture a new theology to answer that question. And yeah, I call it a theology because it has an anthropology, it has a morality, it has a soteriology, and it has an eschatology. I'm going to expand a little bit on that in a moment, but in summary, we evolved to this point, we'll continue to evolve past this point. The only question is, what direction will we evolve, and how can we control and direct it, and who decides? As I said before, transhumanism claims to hold to life-affirming principles and values, but we have to ask, what do they mean by life-affirming? How do they define life? What principles and values would they define as life-affirming? But I think that we and the transhumanists, that is, we, the people of God, and the transhumanists, would see a common problem. Max Moore's wife, Natasha Vita-Moore, sorry for this picture, it looks kind of like her head is floating. She's just very transhumanist. She can detach the head. No, it's just a weird picture. I don't know. She's wearing black. It's a black background. It's just strange. Anyway, transhumanism seeks to offer solutions to the problems of suffering and disease, hunger and death, the inevitability of life as human beings, and the limitations of the human condition. So you can kind of see that transhumanism actually sees the curse of sin and the impact on humanity, and maybe it's part of God's common grace that they're motivated to do something about it. But behind that compassion is a deeper longing. Notice how she talks about the limitations of the human condition as a problem to be solved. You know, they don't mean the limitations that come from the curse of sin. Not only that anyway, they're thinking about the limitations that are even part of our design, like the need for food, oxygen, temperatures between 0 and 100 degrees, limitations like our need to speak with our mouths and hear with our ears, limitations like our reliance on a creator to grant us everlasting life. The more you read, the more you realize that transhumanism is holding out a promise not so different from you will be like God. There's sort of a Venn diagram in a sense between the gospel promises and the transhumanist promises. We want to see an end to disease and a healing for the hurting and everlasting life, but just because there's overlap doesn't mean alignment, right? Transhumanism is offering a replacement hope for the hope of the gospel with its own worldview and its own theology. So for the transhumanist, the theology of origins is atheistic in nature. I mentioned that before. We're the product of natural evolution. That evolution is at best incomplete. Max Moore, the most religious he ever gets, at one point he says that Mother Nature did her best, but her best was not good enough, and now we need to take the reins. We're just a stage along the evolutionary road. Nick Bostrom, who's another prominent transhumanist, said, "We know that blind evolutionary processes can produce human-level general intelligence, since they've already done so at least once." And further, that far from being the smartest possible biological species, we're probably better thought of as the stupidest possible biological species capable of starting a technological civilization. A niche we filled because we got there first, not because we are in any sense optimally adapted to it. I kind of wonder if Bostrom believes in alien cultures out there that have also gotten there. But never mind. Transhumanism has its own morality. Max Moore summarizes their morality with this thought: progress should not bow to fear, but should proceed with eyes wide open. So progress is the ultimate, the highest goal, the highest good, but there's some nuance to that. It's not just progress for its own sake, but it's got to be life-affirming progress with the net benefit of pushing humanity forward. Anders Sundberg is another guy. I keep throwing these names at you, and sorry, like I said before, if you want to read all this stuff, you can, but I've digested all of it for you, so you're welcome. He coined what he calls the central meme of transhumanism, that the human condition can and should be improved by technology. The only limitation or commandment, if you will, is that you don't violate the rights of another. So once again, Natasha Vita-Moore, she said, if there's a fundamental acknowledgement and respect for human rights and individual choices, as long as one person's choice does not hurt another person or damage other life forms, then their views need to be respected and vice versa. In other words, it's a little bit like the Wiccan proverb, that it harms none, do what you will. Transhumanism has soteriology. Now, they don't call it that. They don't use religious terms like soteriology, but central to their future hope is an idea of salvation, that our life can be extended and made indefinite so that, as Yuval Harari puts it, humans may one day choose when their own lifespan comes to an end. Not that we will have to be immortal, but that we will eventually come to the point where we can say, I'm done. The means of salvation proposed by transhumanists are varied because the technology is varied, and nobody can say yet which one's going to really fit the bill, but just a few ideas they have. I mentioned genetic engineering before. If it's possible to turn off the genes that cause us to age and die, well, then maybe we can do that. And there's a geneticist, Michael Rose, who suggests we don't actually need to unlock immortality all at once. If we can get 10 to 20 more years, that gives us a couple more decades of research, and then another couple decades, and then another, and eventually we'll get to the point where we can live several hundred years, and then at that point, we'll probably get tired anyway. Another possibility is prosthetics and biotics. If we can't unlock our genes to eliminate aging and dying, maybe we can just replace the parts when they break down. That's really what's happening when we're dying, right? So Advanced Prosthetics, who's been working on a prosthetic arm that is lifelike, human-like in its functions, is also working on human-like synthetic organisms that could be printed on a 3D printer that are designed to be anti-rejection. They actually would be printed on a 3D printer using your own cells so that it would be your own body parts in a sense. And just replace the parts. Swap them out like a car. Kind of thinking a little bit about the ship of Theseus with that, if you're familiar with that reference. Well, what about maybe brain uploading is the key? If neither of those options works, perhaps we'll find success here. Right? So I mentioned before this Lambda AI that Google is developing. The reason they're developing it is because they want to see how to create a neural network, a digital neural network, that is as close as possible to mimicking the way the human brain operates. Because if they can do so, then they can program it to simulate a specific human brain. And then they could read your brain and all of the neural firings going on in there and, copy it, program the neural network to fit that, and essentially make a digital copy of you. And if, as the transhumanists think, our consciousness is nothing more than the product of the firing of the neurons up in our brains, well, if you have a digital copy of that, it's really a digital copy of you that can exist inside a computer world, a simulated world, or it could be implanted into a robotic body that is able to live as long as the parts can last. Salvation, eternal life. Now, they're not using these terms exactly, but this is very much what they're looking for, which brings us to an eschatology. They don't really know where it's going to end. It's a progression into something. Most transhumanists are reluctant to predict where it's all going to go because we just don't know where all of this technology is going to lead us. And they say, well, the future is wide open. It's one of exploration and discovery. But if we can unlock the door to the future for ourselves, then we'll just see it as it comes. But we know one thing. According to Max Moore, the future belongs to post-humanity. And he'd like to see religion and faith and God and all of those ideas just eliminated. It's very humanist when you think about it. When I was first learning how to be a counselor, as Dr. McPherson mentioned, I do family ministry. A lot of that is family counseling. When I was learning to be a family counselor, one of the things that we were taught about good counseling was to help the counselee align their thoughts with reality. Transhumanism says, no. Let's align our reality to our thoughts and our imaginations. Because if we can just imagine it, then we can pursue it, and as long as we're bold enough to go after it. So transhumanism is selling us a hope. And on the surface, it seems easy enough to reject, but in many small ways, we actually take little steps into it. We don't often see how this is affecting and changing us. Part of that's because the technology isn't always bad. As Dr. McPherson also mentioned, many of us have found good uses for these things. It does things that are helpful, and as we adopt those helpful things, we're more comfortable with the idea of the next step. But I have to ask the question, where's the line? Transhumanists want to see an end to hunger. So do we. Genetically modifying our food so it grows bigger, faster, easier. That's a great step. Humans have been doing that with selective breeding of our foods for a long time. But today, we're doing it even with fiddling with the genetic code. If people are being fed, isn't that good? What if there were other means? What if we could develop AI robots that could do our planting, tending, and harvesting for us? They could work more accurately, more efficiently, without the need for rest, with daylight. They can they can deal with more harsh conditions and so on. Maybe the same kind of technology could be used for shipping and delivery of food. Actually, most people who study this whole problem of hunger throughout the world will tell you that the problem isn't the ability to grow the food. The problem is the ability to get it to people, because things like bureaucracy and transportation and storage often are the biggest issue for us. What if you took the human element out of that? And if that feeds people, isn't this a good thing? Wouldn't we all say, hey, yeah, let's go for it? But what if that means that we could get the AI to do all our work for us? Transhumanists say that eventually we could tune the AI to just take care of everything. And then the product of their work would allow the government to give us a check that pays for all of our needs, which of course our needs would be cheaper because it's not, you have to pay a human to produce things. And so none of us have to go to work. And so what would we do then? Well, according to Nick Bostrom, I mentioned before, we'll play. We'll write poetry. We'll write stories. We'll make music and art. We'll explore philosophy. We'll build relationships. I have a friend on Facebook who posts often about the evils of capitalism, and he says, if only we could eliminate capitalism, boy, all our lives would be much easier because the government would take care of us and we could all just rest and relax and create. That's what he thinks. But does that cut something out of our lives that God has designed for us, right? Wasn't work part of God's original design for humanity even before the fall? What happens to the nature of humanity if we don't have work? Where's the line? Let me tell you a little bit about Tilly Lockey. As a baby, she contracted a rare form of meningitis that actually infected her arms and hands, and so it destroyed them. And today, the Open Biotics company has been able to provide her with what they call hero arms. They're modeled after Battle Angel Alita. She's a movie character. Open Biotics provides such hero arms for other amputees as well, to give them a sense of confidence, right? So instead of the old fiberglass and hook thing, they look like and they feel like, hey, I feel like a real person here. These arms can be attached as well via surgically implanted mounts that tie into the nervous system, so they can actually, swap them out. But when they attach them, all these digital leads are tied into the nervous system, so they can actually feel what the arm is touching, and they can articulate the fingers like a human hand. And they're customizable too, whatever you want. And if this gives an amputee back their functionality and their confidence, isn't this a good thing? Wouldn't we say, how many of us would counsel a Christian friend? No, don't get that. You should live without those things. Well, would we say that? But does my friend with one of these hero arms hope that he's going to have it in heaven? Does he hope that when he's in heaven someday, his arm will still be a hero arm, or does he hope that it will be a human arm? Does it become such a part of his identity that he looks at his resurrected body as having it? What if he starts to see it as better than the original? What if I see it as better than the original? After all, if it's customizable, could I swap out a finger for a lighter, or for a Swiss Army knife, corkscrew, bottle opener? I don't know. But do I say, hey, why don't I get one of those? I'll go in, I'll just have, just take it off. Give me a new one. Swap out, upgrade. Right? So when does therapeutic technology become elective body modification technology? Where's the line? Elon Musk, mentioned him before, his neural link has the possibility to reverse paralysis. Maybe you saw a video a couple of years ago. He released this video of this chimp playing a video game with its mind because the neural link was giving it the ability to do so. Imagine somebody who's a quadriplegic being able to be put into a robotic suit that they can control with the neural link with their mind, so that now they can walk around, grab things. This body that has betrayed them suddenly can be moved by a robotic suit for them at a thought. And we might say, wow, great, you've got it back. But actually the neural link can do even better than that, because they theorize that if you implanted, say somebody's spinal column was severed right in the middle of their back, let's say you implanted one at the top of that and one at the bottom of that, and the two are just talking to each other, you don't have to decode the information. It's too complex anyway to be able to do that. But if you could just pass it along like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, they theorize it's possible. It remakes the connections, bridges the connection, and a paraplegic can walk again. Isn't this a good thing? To have hope again, to have the ability to move again. There's also hope that this neural link could work the other way, to reverse or treat, I should say, depression. That is, that with this neural link implanted in the right place, it could send just a small signal, doesn't take much, to disrupt the certain functions of certain neurons that control the uptake of neurotransmitters, which really is everything we already do. If you struggle with depression and you take a pill for it, that's what the pill is already doing. It's changing how your body takes up those chemicals. But the neural link would be able to do so without all of the sort of side effects. Like, you have to remember to take a pill. It's got chemical side effects that can be unpleasant. You have to balance it. The neural link can just do all that automatically. But that's a life-changing hope for that person with depression. But they want to take it further. With a few tweaks, they could go from just alleviating depression to enhancing life. So our pleasures are really experienced through many of those neurotransmitters anyway. So if we can already tweak those things, well, can we increase the way that our brains interact with the endorphins and the dopamines and so on? Essentially to tweak pleasure. A little adjustment and colors seem more vibrant, food tastes better, sex feels better, the world just seems like a better place. So if my friend with depression can get this chip implanted and feel better from his depression, and then gets a software upgrade, and now he's not just depressed, but he's really happy and just enjoying life, why can't I have the same thing? Why couldn't I just go in and say, hey, I don't have depression, but can you implant one of these chips in my brain? I got the money. Well, if I have the money, right? Oh, there's also some societal impacts there now, because the rich are the ones who are able to experience this. Getting a little bit of Eloy and Morlocks going on in my head now. Where's the line? When does this much become too much? When does a good use of technology turn into a dangerous use of technology? And what about our phones? We've become pretty reliant on them, right? I mean, I think it's great that I can find the best and fastest way to where I need to go with just a few punches of a button. But I used to have this thing called a paper map, right? It's great to be able to find all the answers with a quick search, but what's the trade-off to using that little search function on my phone? Google knows all about me and monetizes it all the time. It's a great thing that I can plug date night with my wife into my calendar so that I have advanced notice and can remember, oh yeah, I got to plan something for this. But my wife and I actually managed to date enough to get married before we had smartphones. Turns out we can do this without them. What about pulling up scripture? I love that anywhere I go, I've got this access to the word in my pocket everywhere I go, that I can just open it up. right? And I can reach any passage, any word from God at any time with multiple cross-references, the ability to take notes. But they used to say that a well-worn Bible was a sign of a well-trained faith. How do you well-worn an app? Right? We were just talking over dinner last night, and that feeling of looking at Grandpa's Bible with all of his dog-eared pages and notes and scribbles and highlights and underlines. Imagine getting Grandpa's smartphone and, did he use, he had a Bible app on it, I guess. It's not the same, is it? And there's something tactile about opening up the Scriptures. So once again, these things can be a blessing and a benefit, but we have to ask, well, what is it doing to me? How is it training me? 30 years ago, we didn't have smartphones, we didn't have social media, we didn't have virtual reality. These were dreams of people who were creating science fiction. We assumed they were a long way off. Now they're here, and we've accustomed ourselves to using them. It won't stop. This is not going to end, so the question we just have to keep asking is, where's the line? But actually, there's a better question. I used to do a lot of youth ministry. I'd have kids always coming up to me, and they'd say, Mr. Steenbock, where's the line? How far is too far? They meant with affectionate things with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and they always wanted to know, how close can I go to actually violating God's sixth commandment without actually stepping right over it? And I'd always say, that's the wrong question. If you're asking, how can I toe the line? Well, it's not the right direction to be going. Don't get close to the line. Go the other direction from the line. Pursue something better. Godly intimacy with your spouse that is to come. But that may not be the right question, actually, when it comes to technology because, technology has always been a part of our world. And it's been a blessing. We're able to be gathered here from lots of different places because of technology. How many of you guys walked from where you live? Took a horse and buggy? Okay, all right, okay, a few of you smart aleck. Yeah. Horse and buggy? No, we used technology to get here, and we're using technology to make sure that people who are not here can see what we're talking about. And our lives are healthier because of technology, giving us more time to do the work of God. A little brief aside, any of you have rickets? Ever have rickets? It's a bone disease. Happens because of vitamin D deficiency. Yeah, and Professor Harry Steenbock, my great-great-great-uncle of the University of Wisconsin in Madison, was the one who figured out how to enrich our foods with vitamin D so that we don't get rickets. You're welcome. We're able to reach so many more people with the gospel because of technology. For that matter, we can each have a copy of the Bible, even a printed copy in our hands because of technology. God used the technology of boats to get Paul on his missionary journeys. He used the technology of the printing press to get Bibles and Luther's works and lots of other great theologians into the hands of the people. He's using technology of the internet to give us access to tools to reach people, to enrich our own spiritual lives. God uses technology, and it can be and is good. So by no means am I saying we should reject technology, but we need to be aware that there's a different hope being presented through technology. Really, it's a life of convenience and ease and solutions to our problems, all apart from the gospel. And so we need to be aware of that, and be aware of how it inundates our lives, the lives of our children, our grandchildren, and how that threatens our reliance on the gospel. We need a theology that grounds us in our identity as human beings. Yes, and more than that, we need one that grounds us in true hope. I believe that grounding starts with the incarnation of Jesus Christ. The incarnation of Jesus grounds us in who we are, what it means to be human, what we look forward to as human beings in eternity. And first, we have to understand and face our reality. Pastor Connor helped us see last night how important it is to keep reality in focus. Let's face the reality that necessitates the incarnation. We are sinners. Sin is a thing, and it infects all of us. Sin brings death. No matter how much someone wants to advance the technology to fight and defeat death, death is a reality And when death comes, we're going to face judgment. Even if I could extend my life to 500 years and then die, I still am going to face judgment. And how will I be judged? That's why Jesus came. That's our hope, is that Jesus came, the Word became flesh to answer that question, how will you be judged? And let's dwell for a moment on what that means. Transhumanists see a future where human beings are evolved, cyborgs, a mix of man and machine, or something else entirely. But Jesus didn't come at a time of cyborgs. Jesus came fully human. He was conceived as a baby inside a womb, inside a woman. He was born. He grew up and lived as a human boy, then as a human man. He died as a human man. He didn't avoid suffering and fight death by escaping it, coming up with some way, let's get away from it. Rather, he embraced it and conquered it. And he rose as a human being. I love this Caravaggio painting. Isn't this great? The very human Jesus being touched by human people in his risen and glorified body. Jesus is a glorified human being, and Jesus is still a human being. Scripture presents him as risen, as a human, and he continues to be human, even in eternity. There's this incredible and mind-spinning truth of Scripture that the Son of God became a human forever. That the Lord and Savior we worship is one of us, and he is also so much more. He's the image of the invisible God. Throughout the Old Testament, there's this motif about how a sinful person can't see God and live. God tells Moses, no one can see my face and live. Multiple people in the Old Testament are confronted with the angel of the Lord, and they say, woe is me, I've seen God. And they think, I'm about to die. They know this is death, but Jesus comes as the image of God that we can look on and survive. And there's another way that he's the image of God. We are made to be in God's image. We lost that, but Jesus comes as the true image of God. In a way, Jesus is the ultimate human. You want to know what defines humanity? What does it mean to be human? Look at Jesus. There it is. Yet, there's another way in which he's not quite like us, right? Because he's also the divine Son of God that made us. He's our creator. Jesus is the one by and through and for whom all things were made. The eternal Son of God is the agent of our creation. He designed and fashioned humanity. The one who made human beings became one. The firstborn over all creation. Now there's a truth you can dwell in for a while. And he's the firstborn from the dead. That the resurrection of Jesus is our guarantee of resurrection. If he's the firstborn, what does that imply? There's more to come, right? He is our guarantee. Forget genetic research, okay? Forget bionic organs, forget brain uploading. You will rise from death and you will live eternally. Jesus is the second Adam. Adam was the first human being, the prototype of humanity. He fell, we're fallen, just as he was. Jesus is the second Adam, the new pattern for glorified humanity. We are glorified in him because he lives. You too will live. And Scripture tells us that our bodies will be fashioned after his glorious body. So if Jesus is a glorified human being, what will we be in eternity? Glorified human beings. Because the gift of God is eternal life. This tells us things about our identity and our purpose. We're going to use technology. Part of that is because it's part of creation, and we are stewards of creation. So we're going to use technology to be good stewards. To steward the earth that God has given us and the people of that earth. And we're going to turn the creative power of technology to God's good purposes. Purposes like making disciples of all nations, sharing the gospel through the technology through the gateways that the technology gives to us, purposes like preaching Christ crucified to the world. Purposes like preaching the resurrection as the surest hope that we have. See, if we put technology into the right place, into the place of serving these ends, then we make it a servant rather than letting ourselves become servants of it. One other thing about technology that's interesting to note, transhumanists, they kind of ask the question, what are we going to do when we create artificial beings, robots that act, and talk just like us? How do we treat them? And as Christians, we also have to wrestle with that question. How will we treat them? Are they just things? Well, maybe the key is in the word humane. We talk about the humane treatment of animals. The origin of that is not that we treat animals like they're humans. They're not. But that our humanity somewhat depends on how we treat animals. That is, that it's a reflection of, as a human, the human thing to do with an animal is not to treat it badly, to treat it well, to take care of it, because that's part of my job. So if I've created a robot that talks and acts and looks like me, what should I do with that? What if someday in the future we've got robotic servants and you see a couple of teenage boys destroying one on the side of the road? Wouldn't you think there's something wrong with these boys? Right? We'll take care of them. Treat them the way that we treat other things we have. I take care of my car. I'll take care of whatever else God chooses to give me in the future. But let's talk about practicalities for a minute. What can we do to face transhumanism, to take this truth, this hope that we have, the hope of the resurrection that we've just looked at, and apply it in our decision-making with technology? I'd love it if I could give you a rubric, flowchart. Here it is. Do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. I can't give you that. But what I can give you are some things that are worth doing. First of all, how about this? Memorize the book of Colossians. When I was writing this thesis paper that Dr. McPherson referenced, Colossians was really I'll say the foundation of my theology section, and it was very useful. There's so much there about how Christ is truly God and truly man that gives us that clear understanding. But you might also memorize 1 Corinthians 15, Romans 5, Philippians 2. Those also good. Just memorize the whole Bible. Go for it. Live according to reality. The transhumanist worldview is about imagination. It's about imagining what's possible and then pursuing it, seeing if I can get to it. That's risky. Not because we might fail, but because we might succeed. Better to live in reality, and that means rejecting certain things. Current trend in our culture, my truth, your truth. How about the truth? Live in that reality. As Pastor Connor talked about last night, we also want to speak according to reality. Don't apologize for the truth. Unless you mean in that sort of classical sense of defending it as apology. What I mean is there's a lot of apologetics technique out there that will tell you, well, if you're having an argument with somebody, you got to get on their level and talk about things at their level. And so, say, okay, let's take religion out of the picture for a second. Let's just show you how scientifically your view fails. But, then we're ceding ground, aren't we? We're saying, oh, we'll come on your level and talk about things. Well, why? Why not speak the truth, the way that the truth has been given to us? I understand there's nuances to that, but don't let the world dictate our terms. Don't be afraid to say, I believe this is what the truth is. Say it. The word works. Use it. I talked before about that overlap between gospel promises and transhuman promises, and to an extent, yes, we do want to see an end to suffering and hurting, but aren't those also a source of blessing? Isn't suffering one of the means God uses to bring us blessings? We had a young woman in our congregation. She had been praying. She told us that she had been praying to grow deeper in her faith, to pray more, and to grow deeper in relationship with other Christian women. Well, a little while later, she became pregnant, and then soon after discovered she had cancer. She waited until the baby was born to get any treatment because she didn't want it to affect the baby. She had the baby, then started getting treatment, but the cancer was so advanced at that point that despite treatments, it kept coming back, more and more aggressive each time. And in her early 30s, she passed away. But just before she died, she told a couple of us on our ministry staff, she said, I've been praying God would increase my faith enhance my prayer life, deepen my relationships with Christian women. Through giving me this cancer, God has made me trust him more. I've prayed so much more and more often than ever before, and I've had conversations with women I never would have had. God answered my prayer through cancer. Sometimes our ingenuity gets in the way of blessings. And if our ingenuity could eliminate suffering, well, what blessings will we lose in the process? Finally, just be aware of how technology changes you. And along with that, I just want to say, let the words and I'm going to use the word spectacle of Jesus be greater than anything else. When it comes to technology, no one has really helped my discipleship with technology, if I can call it that, more than this guy, Tony Reinke, brilliant Jesus-following journalist who has written these two books. The one on the left, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You, got a bigger splash because it's more practical. But really, the one on the right, Competing Spectacles, is the better book in my opinion. It's also shorter. It really just focuses you on the fact that our whole world is trying to compete for your attention. It wants to grab you and get your eyes on anything other than the cross. Don't let it. Focus on the cross, the empty tomb, the risen Jesus. And as you consider, how is this technology going to fit into my future life, ask yourself just these simple questions. How is this going to change me? And will this help me see my Savior better? And how? Just to conclude a little, transhumanism, hopefully you know a little bit more about this word than you did before. It's a force driving our technology, culture, media, and a hope for the future, and it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. This is going to continue to advance. Don't believe that it will stop. It has not. It will not. I can't tell you where it's all leading, but I know what the hope that it offers, it's not real hope. There is real hope, and that hope is found in the person of Jesus Christ. It's found in his humanity, his creation of our humanity, his birth as a human, his death as a human, his resurrection as a human, and his promise that you will live eternally as a human, just as he is human. This is your lifeline. Thank you very much.
I thank you for fulfilling the promise I made to the audience before your talk, namely that you would not just lose us in science fiction, but that you would steer us to some very practical theological points.
Might have been afraid of that for the first, maybe half or so there.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
There's a lot to chew on, yeah.
We do have time for questions from the audience, so I welcome you to approach the microphone there, and just please talk closely to the microphone. The sound technicians will take care of the volume level for you, and please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah.
Are we on?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Steenbock. Tremendous presentation. First, a quick comment, then a question.
Sure.
The comment, I really appreciated how you pointed out that transhumanism is more than just technology. It's a worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And as a worldview, it functions as a religion. Nancy Percy talks a lot about that. So really, this is it's technology, it's a worldview, it's a philosophy, it's a religion. And Colossians 2:8 says, be careful that you don't get, my own translation, sucked into godless philosophies.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Question. Relating this to another worldview, the globalists commonly say they are also, they don't believe in free enterprise, they're socialists. They also commonly say things like, in the future, you won't own anything and you'll be happy about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Are they talking about transhumanism as being the key to that goal that they put forward?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's Jerry Kaplan and Nick Bostrom both talk a lot about that. If you ever watched the old Star Trek show, that was the basis, right? Their whole society was totally egalitarian. Nobody ever needed anything, and now they could just explore space. And they say, well, we can make that a reality. If we can get, robots who can do all our work for us, and we can get computers to make the decisions for us, then nobody needs to go to war and have conflict or fights or anything, and then we'll all just hold everything in common. That's the globalism that you're talking about. Yeah, if we can just all share everything in common, then, boy, what a utopia we'll live under. In a lot of ways, the transhumanist vision doesn't understand, even though they see the curse of sin, they don't understand sin as a curse. They just see it as a flaw to overcome that we can overcome by our own ingenuity if we just work hard enough. Yeah, thank you for that question. That's good.
Thank you, Brandon. First, a disclaimer. I'm 65, not 50 or younger, and I have a sort of smartphone that I mostly use to make phone calls.
Yeah.
But, in the old days, to get your thesis or a dissertation, you have to pay Ann Arbor, and they would print it for you. I just want everybody here to know that Martin Luther College does have his thesis, and I checked it with my phone. It's posted on our website. So do cyborgs have hope? Just Google search that, or Brandon Steenbock master's thesis, and it'll pop right up, and you can read it. I'd encourage you to do that.
Yeah, thanks for that promotion.
Yeah.
I don't get paid for that, though.
Where is the line? That is an important question. It's kind of fuzzy, especially somebody my age thinking about technology and all these things. But a distinction that, may be helpful. As you were speaking, I thought of that classic magisterial use of reason versus ministerial use of reason. And I don't know that we'll always be able to figure out where is that line. But if something else to memorize, 2 Corinthians 10:5, if we are taking captive every thought in obedience to Christ, that'll help us in trying to puzzle that out. So just the question really is, what about applying those categories of magisterial, ministerial use of not reason, but technology to this topic?
Yeah, one thing that I've thought about is the need for us. Well, I don't know if we have a theological statement about technology, but that would be a great place to start. Would be, what is the ministerial use of technology in our churches and in our lives as believers? That would be worth taking the time to develop. I think that's a good category for it. I guess I don't know that I have more of an answer than to say yes to your question. Great. Go ahead.
Thank you. I happened to get here a couple minutes late, and you maybe started with what I'm going to ask you.
Sure.
But it seems to me that this will never end because they will never be content. And I think happiness is being content with what God gives you. As Paul said, I've learned to be content in all circumstances.
Yeah.
But my comment or question I'd like you to respond to is, I think this whole transhumanism comes from rejecting God, first of all, and we have moved from not being satisfied with being created in the image of God. We have moved past that sin to the sin of the devil who wanted to be God. And we've been able to do a lot of these things because we are created in the image of God. And they will never succeed in having this salvation, immortality, because life comes from God.
Yeah. I think there's two things at work that I really appreciate where you're leading us there. There's really two things at work. One is what some have called the God-shaped hole in the heart of human beings. And they, as I said before, they see the curse of sin and they want to address it. And so there's almost in a way a good motivation there, if I can even say that people without Christ have any good motivations, but you know where I'm going. There's something that's just saying, I'm looking for what God has, but then it's turning away and saying, but I don't want what God gives. I want to be the one to solve that. Yeah, I want to be God. That's the temptation that Jesus was given too, right? That Satan comes along and says, don't just take what God has given you. Let me show you how you can have everything for yourself anyway by turning away from him. And that's the temptation. In many ways, it's the same old lie, just adapted for a modern culture. I've been pretty convinced there's got to be, Satan's got to have one demon who's in charge of his R&D department. Some guy who came along and said, hey, I got an idea. It's called Facebook. And he was like, promote that guy, Yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. I know we have to be very careful to not call things sinful that are not necessarily spelled out as such. But at some point, don't we have to say no? I mean, as a church, and just as an example, you say, replacing our arms with robotic arms, and then our legs, and then our internal organs, and then our whole body, and then we download our thoughts into an artificial brain. I mean, at some point, we've got to say, okay, technology went from being useful to replacing who we are and what we're supposed to be by God.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know these are tough questions, but isn't there a place where we do have to start saying, okay, well, that's too far, and tell people no?
I think so, and I think that, maybe a good place to start with that is to say, if this technology involves changing the body God has given me, not therapeutically, but just simply because I want to, that's a hard no, right? Yeah, I mean, if my arm is perfectly functioning, but I just want to cut it off and put on a robotic arm, that's a no. Yeah, absolutely. But for the person who's born with a shriveled arm, well, now there's a different question, right? Maybe not. It really depends. Depends on what's being offered and how he's seeing that. Where's his heart? What is his hope? There's so many questions that I, as a counselor, would want to sit, as a pastoral counselor, would want to spend time with him and find out, what are you really hoping for here? So I have to be careful not to be too definitive in where the no's are. But like you said, there are places where I do have to say no. But I think that's the nature of pastoral care too for our people.
Thank you.
So last night we had a presentation and conversation about identity, who we are in Christ, and the idea of transhumanism, that is where it's going in the future. I think it's important for us to recognize where it is right now in the present, and the whole idea that has captured our culture is that we create ourselves. We are our gods. We create who we are. You walk into a classroom right now, kindergarten through 3, and you've got a picture, a graphic of a genderbread person. And that genderbread person has 4 different levels of identity. One is the brain, one is the genitals, one is the heart, one is the expression. And a child at a very young age is being told that they create whoever they want to be. They mix and match. And this has just absolutely taken over our culture. It's everywhere. And so when somebody wants to be somebody, it can be created. And you start taking hormones and you start taking surgeries to become who you decide you want to be. It has nothing to do with who you're created to be. So I want to address perhaps is where we have already adopted the basic fundamentals of transhumanism in a deep, dark way. And it's like, it's overwhelmed families and parents and children to a point that they don't know what to do about this because it's true. It's now put forth as absolute truth in the schools and in the culture, and anybody who challenges that is considered an enemy and a hateful person. That's how far, that is transhumanism, and it's already embedded in everywhere where our culture is and where our children look. And I just wonder how we as a church can equip families and young people to face this reality that has just enveloped us.
Yeah, that's really good. The whole LGBT movement is where I referred earlier to the people who would not call themselves transhumanist, but really live according to its philosophy or think according to its philosophy. I would say the whole LGBT movement has, in some ways, at least been, second cousin to it, if not right out of it. Because, maybe you remember this, that back 20, 30 years ago, part of the discussion about people who were homosexual is, Pastor Connor, people who have homosexual leanings, would that be the right way to say that? Thank you. Was that perhaps they're a new phase of evolution. Now, of course, they've now retreated from that and said, no, people have always been doing this, right? But that was also said with transgenderism. Oh, well, humanity is evolving, and that's why we're seeing a rise in transgenderism. It's part of our evolution, and now we can choose how to evolve that direction. So yeah, it's very much related to it. It's all part of the same kind of, once again, go back to that question, what does it mean to be human? That's what's lurking behind this question. Yeah.
We do have time just briefly for one more question. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so it seems like every time we have some, new technological advancement that's theorized, there's a group of people that says, well, this is the mark of the beast, and this is the mark of the beast. So I guess I have kind of a two-part question of, do you believe that the mark of the beast is going to be some kind of future technology? And if so, how are we going to recognize that? Because I can't imagine God would be real sneaky about what the mark of the beast is, but at the same time, ignorance isn't an excuse for sin. So how do we look for that and recognize the actual mark of the beast as opposed to all these other things out there?
Sure. That's a great question. And it gets to Revelation, right? Which is full of a lot of symbolism and imagery that it's hard to say sometimes what is that thing. Rather, we can maybe there's a great book from Siegbert Becker, a commentary on Revelation from many years ago, where he actually tries to do that with a lot of things, and very insightful. But I'm going to say a word of caution with any imagery out of Revelation. Be careful that we don't assign anything in the world to it too definitively. Rather say, the message of Revelation is, Jesus wins, we win with him. Everything else is just, okay, this might be what it means, but the Bible doesn't always interpret it for us. I'm not convinced that the mark of the beast is going to be any specific technology. I'm fairly convinced that the idea of the mark of the beast has to do with whose name do I carry? Who do I represent in the world? What is the public facing of my life? Does it look like I follow Jesus, or does it look like I follow somebody else? And at some point in the future, I think we're seeing that already starting in our country, there will come a point where our society will say, if you don't say I'm following someone other than Jesus, if you don't publicly make that statement, you don't get to buy and sell. You don't get to engage in the marketplace. You don't get to share your ideas. You're silenced. You're punished. That's what I think the mark of the beast is. So I don't think I would assign any particular technology to it. By the way, Tony Reinke, the guy who wrote that 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You, the first couple of chapters are fantastic. He talks about God using technology. And he actually says, maybe the reason John had such trouble describing heaven when he sees it in Revelation is because it's a technologically advanced future and he doesn't know how to describe it. He's like, imagine if you saw, like futuristic plexiglass streets. How would you describe that? Maybe like streets that are made of pure gold as clear as glass. I don't know if that's what's actually happening there, but it's kind of fascinating. Did that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up there?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Jesus wins and we win with him. That's a good way to end.
That's a good way to end.